There's a sound that not everyone hears. It doesn't come through noise. It doesn't compete with the chaos of the world. And it doesn't force its way into your life. It waits. It whispers. It calls not to the crowd, but to the heart that is willing to listen. And today, if you can hear even a faint echo of that voice inside you, then this message is for you. Because there's a calling on your life that many will never recognize. Not because it isn't real, but because it doesn't fit into the patterns they understand. It won't always make sense. It won't always feel comfortable. And it certainly won't always be easy. But it is divine. You see, we live in a time where everyone is speaking, but very few are listening. Everyone is chasing something loud, something visible, something immediate. But the voice of God doesn't operate that way. It speaks in stillness. It moves in quiet obedience. It reveals itself in moments where the world would say, nothing is happening. And that is why many miss it. They're too distracted, too busy, too filled with noise to recognize the sacred whisper that could change everything. But there's something different about you. You felt it, haven't you? That inner pull, that unexplainable stirring, that sense that you were made for something more, even when you couldn't put it into words, even when others dismissed it, even when you tried to ignore it. It never left, because a true calling doesn't disappear. It waits for your attention. And here's the truth that many don't want to hear. Not everyone is meant to understand your journey. Not everyone is meant to walk with you into what God is preparing. Some people are assigned to your past, but not to your future. That doesn't make them bad. It just means they're not aligned with what God is doing in your life right now. And that can feel lonely. There will be moments where obedience feels like isolation. Moments where doing the right thing costs your relationships, comfort, and clarity. Moments where you question if you heard God correctly. But let me tell you something. God does his deepest work in hidden places. Before the world ever sees the fruit, there is a season of roots. Before there is elevation, there is separation. Before there is clarity, there is testing. And if you're in that place right now, where things feel uncertain, where doors seem closed, where your path feels different from everyone around you, you are not being forgotten. You are being prepared. Your ears deserve to hear this truth before the noise of the world tries to drown it out. What God has placed inside you is not random. It is intentional. It is sacred, and it requires your attention. But attention is costly. You cannot hear God clearly if your life is filled with distractions. You cannot follow his voice if you're constantly seeking validation from people. You cannot walk in your calling if you are afraid to stand alone. This is where many turn back. Not because they are incapable, but because they are unwilling to surrender. Surrender is not weakness. It is alignment. It is saying, God, even when I don't understand, I trust you. Even when it hurts, I will follow. Even when it costs me, I will obey. And that kind of faith, real faith, is rare. That is why this is a calling few understand. Because it requires you to let go of who you thought you would be, to become who God created you to be. It requires you to release control, to walk by faith. It requires you to silence the world, to hear heaven. And time is not something we can take for granted. There are moments when God speaks that are meant to be responded to, not delayed, not ignored, not postponed for a better time. Because the truth is, not every opportunity to respond to his voice lasts forever. That's why your ears deserve this message before it's gone, before the distractions return, before the doubts grow louder, before fear convinces you to stay where you are. Listen carefully. If God is calling you to step out, do it. If he is calling you to let go, release it. If he is calling you to trust him deeper, lean in. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to see the entire path. You don't need approval from everyone around you. You just need to hear him and respond. Because one moment of obedience can shift your entire life. And one decision to ignore his voice can delay what he is trying to do in you. This is not about perfection. It is about willingness. God is not looking for the most qualified. He is looking for the most surrendered. And if you are willing, truly willing, then even in your weakness, even in your uncertainty, even your fear, he will guide you. He will strengthen you. He will equip you. He will lead you exactly where you need to be. But you must listen, not with your ears alone, but with your heart. Because the calling you carry is not ordinary. It is sacred, it is intentional, and it is time to answer it. There is a voice that does not shout, a call that does not force its way into your life, a whisper that waits patiently on the edge of your attention. It does not compete with the noise around you because it was never meant to. While the world grows louder, more demanding, more urgent with every passing moment, this voice remains steady, gentle, and persistent. It speaks in a way that requires stillness, in a way that demands something rare in this generation, the willingness to pause and truly listen. Most people miss it, not because it isn't speaking, but because their lives are filled with constant distraction. Every moment is occupied, every silence is filled, every quiet space is avoided. The world has trained hearts to fear stillness, to run from it, to replace it with noise, entertainment, and endless activity. But the voice of God does not follow the patterns of the world. It doesn't chase attention. It invites it. And only those who are willing to step away from the noise will begin to recognize that something deeper has been speaking to them all along. You may have felt it before in moments you couldn't explain. A sudden sense of knowing that didn't come from logic. A quiet pull in a direction that didn't make sense at the time. A feeling that there is more to your life than what you see right now. These are not accidents. These are not random thoughts passing through your mind. These are invitations. Subtle, sacred invitations to tune your heart to something greater than yourself. But recognizing that voice requires a shift. It requires you to value what the world often overlooks. In a culture that celebrates speed, God moves in patience. In a world that rewards visibility, God works in hiddenness. In a life that is constantly rushing forward, God often speaks in the moments when everything slows down. And if you're not careful, you will rush past the very thing that was meant to guide you. There's a reason why the whisper is quiet. It reveals the posture of your heart. Anyone can respond to something loud. Anyone can react when something demands attention. But it takes sensitivity, humility, and intentional focus to hear what is gentle. The whisper separates those who are truly seeking from those who are only reacting. It draws a line between those who are willing to listen and those who are too distracted to notice. Sometimes that whisper will lead you in ways that feel uncomfortable. It may ask you to step away from things that once felt familiar. It may challenge your habits, your relationships, your plans. It may call you into places where certainty does not exist and where faith becomes your only guide. And in those moments, the natural response is to hesitate, to question, to doubt whether what you are hearing is real. But the whisper does not disappear just because you hesitate. It remains. It waits. It continues to gently call, not with pressure, but with persistence. And the longer you ignore it, the easier it becomes to silence it beneath the weight of distractions. Not because the voice is gone, but because your attention has been given to everything else. This is the danger that many never recognize. They assume that if something is truly important, it will force itself into their lives. They believe that what is meant for them will always be obvious, loud, and undeniable. But the most important directions in your life will not come that way. They will come quietly, requiring your awareness, your stillness, your willingness to lean in rather than pull away. There is something sacred about the moment when you begin to recognize that voice. It changes the way you see everything. Situations that once felt random begin to carry meaning. Decisions that once felt confusing begin to gain clarity. You start to realize that you are not moving through life alone, that there is guidance available to you, but it requires your participation. It requires you to listen, to discern, to respond. Listening is not passive. It is active. It is a deliberate choice to quiet the noise around you and within you. It is the discipline of turning down the volume of everything else so that you can focus on what truly matters. And this is not easy. It goes against the rhythm of the world. It requires you to say no to things that constantly demand your attention and yes to moments that others might consider unproductive. But in those quiet moments, something powerful begins to happen. Your thoughts become clearer. Your spirit becomes more sensitive. You begin to recognize patterns, nudges, impressions that you once overlooked. The whisper becomes more familiar, not because it has grown louder, but because you have grown more attentive. And with that awareness comes responsibility. Because once you hear, you cannot pretend that you didn't. Once you recognize the direction, you are faced with a choice. Will you follow, or will you return to the noise? Will you trust what you cannot fully explain, or will you cling to what feels safe and predictable? The whisper will never force you. It will never override your will. It honors your freedom, even when your choices lead you away from it. But it continues to call, not out of obligation, but out of purpose. Because what it is leading you toward is not random. It is aligned with who you were created to be. There will be moments when following that whisper feels like walking alone. When others do not understand why you are making certain decisions. When explanations fall short and clarity feels distant. But the whisper was never meant to be validated by others. It was meant to be recognized by you. This is why sensitivity matters more than certainty. You may not always have all the answers, but if you can hear and respond, you will be guided step by step. The whisper does not reveal everything at once. It gives you just enough to move forward, just enough to trust, just enough to take the next step without seeing the entire path. And as you continue to listen, something shifts within you. Fear begins to lose its grip. Doubt becomes quieter. Confidence grows, not in yourself alone, but in the one who is guiding you. You begin to understand that you were never meant to figure everything out on your own, that there is a wisdom beyond your understanding that is available to you if you are willing to listen. But this requires consistency. You cannot listen once and expect clarity forever. It is a daily posture, a continual choice to remain open, aware, and attentive. Because the world will always try to pull you back into noise. It will always offer distractions that seem urgent, appealing, and harmless, but slowly pull your focus away from what truly matters. And if you're not intentional, you will drift. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually. One distraction at a time, one ignored whisper at a time, until the voice that once felt clear becomes distant. Not because it stopped speaking, but because you stopped listening. This is why your ears deserve this moment. Because in a world filled with noise, clarity is rare. Direction is rare. True guidance is rare. And when you have the opportunity to hear something that carries purpose, something that aligns with your calling, something that speaks to the deepest part of who you are, it is not something to take lightly. There's a calling hidden within that whisper, a direction that cannot be found in noise, a path that will only be revealed to those who are willing to listen beyond what is obvious, beyond what is loud, beyond what is easy. There's a season in life that feels like everything is being pulled away at once. People you once walked closely with begin to drift. Places that once felt comfortable start to feel unfamiliar. Patterns that once gave you a sense of stability begin to break apart. And in the middle of it all, you are left standing in a space that feels both empty and confusing, wondering why everything is changing when you didn't ask for it. This is the place where many misinterpret what is happening. They assume they're losing something, that something is going wrong, that life is becoming unstable. But what feels like loss is often the beginning of alignment. What feels like distance is often the start of preparation. Because before anything in your life can be elevated, something within your life must be separated. Elevation is something people desire, but separation is something they resist. Everyone wants to grow, to rise, to step into something greater, but very few are willing to release what is familiar to get there. And yet, it is impossible to carry everything from your past into the place where you are being called. Some things cannot go with you, not because they are bad, but because they no longer fit who you are becoming. Separation is not always loud or dramatic. It does not always come with clear explanations or obvious reasons. Sometimes it happens quietly, through small shifts that slowly change the direction of your life. Conversations become shorter. Connections feel different. Opportunities that once excited you no longer hold the same meaning. It can feel unsettling because you cannot fully explain it, and yet you can feel it deeply. In those moments, there's a temptation to hold on, to try to restore what is fading, to resist the change because it feels uncomfortable. You may try to force connections to remain the same. You may revisit old patterns, hoping they will bring back a sense of familiarity. But what you're trying to hold on to is not meant to continue in the same way. It has already served its purpose. There's a divine wisdom in this process, even when it doesn't feel like it. Because separation is not about taking something away from you without reason. It is about creating space for something that cannot exist alongside what you're leaving behind. It is about refining your focus, clearing your path, and aligning your life with where you're meant to go. But clarity rarely comes at the beginning of separation. Instead, there's a period of uncertainty, a space where you're no longer who you used to be, but you have not yet fully stepped into who you are becoming. This in-between place can feel isolating. It can feel like you're standing still while everything else moves forward. It can make you question whether you are on the right path at all. This is where trust becomes essential. Not the kind of trust that depends on visible outcomes, but the kind that holds steady even when nothing makes sense. The kind that believes there is purpose in the process, even when that purpose has not yet been revealed. Because what is being formed in you during this time is just as important as where you are being led. Separation refines your identity. It removes the influences that once shaped your decisions and forces you to confront who you are without them. It challenges you to stand on your own convictions rather than relying on the approval or presence of others. It teaches you to find stability within yourself rather than in external circumstances. And this is not easy. There will be moments when you feel the weight of that isolation, when you miss what used to be, even if you know it was not meant to last. There will be moments when you wonder if the cost is too high, if the distance is worth it, if the path you are on is leading anywhere at all. But those moments are part of the process. They are not signs that something is wrong, but signs that something deeper is taking place. Because elevation requires strength, and strength is not built in comfort. It is built in moments where you're stretched, where you're challenged, where you are required to grow beyond what feels natural. And separation is one of the ways that growth is initiated. It removes the support systems you relied on so that you can develop new ones that are aligned with your future. There's also a level of clarity that only comes through distance. When you're constantly surrounded by the same people, the same environments, the same routines, it can be difficult to see things objectively. But when separation occurs, it creates space for reflection. It allows you to see what was truly adding value to your life and what was holding you back. You begin to notice patterns you once ignored. You begin to understand dynamics that once confused you. You begin to see yourself more clearly, without the constant influence of others shaping your perception. And this awareness is necessary for the next stage of your journey. Because elevation is not just about external success or visible progress. It is about internal transformation. It is about becoming someone who can handle what is ahead, who can carry greater responsibility, who can walk with confidence and clarity in spaces that once felt out of reach. And that transformation requires space. It requires time. It requires moments where you're not distracted by everything that once filled your life. It requires a willingness to sit in the discomfort of change and allow it to shape you rather than resist it. There will be times when separation feels like rejection, when doors close without explanation, when opportunities you expected to work out suddenly fall apart, when people you thought would always be there become distant. And in those moments, it is easy to take it personally, to assume that something is wrong with you, that you're being left behind. But what feels like rejection is often redirection. What feels like something ending is often something shifting into alignment. Because not every closed door is a loss. Some are protections. Some are adjustments. Some are necessary steps to ensure that you do not remain in a place that no longer serves your purpose. And as difficult as it may be to accept, not everyone is meant to walk with you into your next season. Some people are part of your foundation, not your future. They played a role in shaping who you are, but they're not meant to be part of where you're going. And holding on to them beyond their time can create resistance in a process that is meant to flow. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It does not mean dismissing the value of what once was. It simply means recognizing that growth requires movement, and movement sometimes requires release. It means trusting that what is leaving is making room for what is coming, even if you cannot see it yet. And while the process of separation may feel slow, while it may feel like you're waiting longer than you expected, there is something happening beneath the surface that you cannot always measure. There is preparation taking place. There is alignment unfolding. There is a foundation being built that will support what is ahead. You are being shaped in ways that will only make sense later. You are being positioned for opportunities that require a version of you that is still being developed. You are being guided through a process that is not random, even when it feels uncertain. And in this place, patience becomes a form of strength. The ability to remain steady without rushing the process, to trust without forcing outcomes, to continue moving forward even when the path is not fully clear. Because elevation is not something that happens overnight. It is the result of consistent growth, intentional change, and the willingness to go through seasons that others might avoid. There is purpose in this separation, even if you cannot fully understand it right now. There is meaning in the distance, even if it feels uncomfortable. There is direction in what feels like disruption, even if it challenges everything you expected. And as you continue to move through this season, as you continue to release what is no longer aligned, as you continue to trust the process even when it stretches you, you're stepping into a level of growth that cannot be achieved any other way, a level of clarity that only comes through experience, a level of strength that is built through moments that test your willingness to keep going when everything around you is changing. There's a price attached to every calling, a weight that cannot be avoided, a cost that must be counted long before the reward is ever seen. Many are drawn to purpose because of what it promises, but few remain when they realize what it requires. Because surrender is not a moment of emotion, it is a lifestyle of release. It is not a single decision. It is a continuous yielding of your will, your plans, your desires, over and over again. At first, surrender sounds simple. It feels like something you can do quickly, something you can declare with confidence. You say the words, you feel the conviction, you believe you are ready. But then life begins to test those words. Situations arise that challenge your comfort. Opportunities appear that tempt you to take control again. Delays stretch your patience. Silence tests your faith. And in those moments, surrender becomes real. Because surrender is not proven in what you say, it is revealed in what you release. It begins with control, the desire to know everything, to plan everything, to secure outcomes before they happen. You want certainty, clarity, assurance that what you are doing will lead somewhere meaningful. But the path of surrender does not offer that kind of control. It invites you to trust without full understanding, to move without having every detail mapped out, to believe even when the evidence is not visible. And this is where the tension begins. Because your natural instinct is to hold on, to protect yourself from uncertainty, to make decisions that feel safe and predictable. But surrender calls you beyond that instinct. It calls you into a space where faith becomes your foundation, where obedience matters more than comfort, where trust replaces control. This does not mean you stop thinking or stop planning. It means you stop relying on your understanding as the final authority. It means you become open to guidance that may not align with what you expected. It means you allow your direction to be shaped by something greater than your own perspective. And that kind of surrender requires humility. It requires you to admit that you do not have all the answers, that your vision is limited, that your plans may not be the best path forward. It requires you to release the need to always be right, to always be in charge, to always have things figured out. But humility is not weakness. It is strength under direction. It is the ability to step back so that something greater can lead. It is the willingness to be guided rather than driven by your own impulses. As surrender deepens, it begins to touch other areas of your life. It moves beyond control and into identity. Who you thought you would be, what you believe your life would look like, the expectations you carried for yourself. These things begin to shift, not because they were meaningless, but because they were incomplete. There are dreams you may have to release, not because they were wrong, but because they were not aligned with your true calling. There are versions of yourself you may have to let go of, not because they were failures, but because they were stepping stones. And letting go of those things can feel like loss, even when it is leading to something greater. This is one of the hardest parts of surrender. Releasing what you have invested time, energy, and emotion into. Letting go of what feels familiar. Accepting that the path ahead may look different from what you imagined. It requires a level of trust that goes beyond logic, beyond reason, beyond what you can easily explain. And then there is the surrender of timing. The willingness to wait when everything in you wants to move. The ability to remain steady when progress feels slow. The patience to trust that delays are not denials, that waiting is not wasting, that something is happening even when you cannot see it. This kind of surrender is tested in silence. When you have done what you believe is right, but the results have not yet appeared. When you have followed the direction you were given, but clarity still feels distant. When you're standing in a place where nothing seems to be changing and you begin to question if anything is happening at all. In those moments, the temptation to take control returns. To rush the process, to create your own outcomes, to force something to happen just to feel movement. But forced movement often leads away from alignment. It creates results that may look right on the surface, but lack the depth and stability that come from true guidance. Surrender requires you to resist that temptation, to remain where you are placed until it is time to move, to trust that timing is just as important as direction, to believe that waiting has purpose, even when it feels uncomfortable. There's also the surrender of approval. The need to be understood, to be accepted, to have others agree with your decisions. This can be one of the most challenging aspects because it touches your sense of belonging. You want people to see what you see, to support what you are doing, to validate your choices. But not everyone will understand your path. Not everyone will see what you see. Not everyone will agree with the direction you are taking. And if your obedience depends on their approval, you will constantly find yourself torn between following your calling and maintaining acceptance. Surrender means choosing alignment over approval. It means being willing to stand alone if necessary. It means trusting that being understood by everyone is not a requirement for walking in purpose. And then there is the surrender of outcomes. Letting go of the need to control how things turn out. Releasing the expectation that everything will happen exactly as you envision. Accepting that the results may look different, may take longer, may unfold in ways you did not anticipate. This does not mean you stop caring about results. It means you stop attaching your identity to them. It means your peace is not dependent on everything going your way. It means your faith remains steady, regardless of what you see. Because surrender is not about losing. It is about aligning. It is about positioning yourself in a way that allows something greater to work through you. It is about becoming a vessel rather than a controller, a participant rather than a director. And this process is ongoing. It is not something you complete once and move on from. It is something you return to daily, sometimes moment by moment. Because life will continually present situations that challenge your willingness to release, to trust, to follow. There will be days when surrender feels natural, when trust comes easily, when everything seems to align. And there will be days when it feels difficult, when doubt creeps in, when the cost feels heavier than expected. But both kinds of days are part of the journey. Because the cost of surrender is not meant to break you. It is meant to shape you. It is meant to refine your character, strengthen your faith, deepen your understanding. It is meant to prepare you for a level of purpose that requires more than just intention, that requires commitment, consistency, and trust. And as you continue to surrender, as you continue to release what you cannot control, as you continue to trust what you cannot fully see, you begin to experience a different kind of freedom. Not the freedom of having everything your way, but the freedom of knowing you are aligned with something greater. The freedom of not carrying the weight of control. The freedom of moving with purpose rather than pressure. This is the cost that few are willing to pay, not because it is impossible, but because it requires a level of trust that goes beyond what is comfortable, a level of release that goes beyond what feels safe, a level of faith that continues even when the path is not fully clear. There comes a point in the journey where obedience begins to separate you in ways you did not expect. Not because you chose isolation, not because you desired distance, but because the path you are walking no longer aligns with the direction others are going. What once felt shared now feels divided. What once felt understood now feels questioned. And the more committed you become to doing what is right, the more alone it can begin to feel. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of faith. Many believe that walking in obedience will always bring clarity, support, and affirmation. They expect that doing the right thing will make everything easier, smoother, more accepted. But the truth is, obedience often leads you into spaces where comfort is removed, where familiarity fades, where approval is no longer guaranteed. Because obedience is not about blending in. It is about standing firm, even when standing firm sets you apart. There will be moments when you notice the distance first. Conversations that used to flow naturally become strained. People who once celebrated you begin to question your decisions. The same choices that once brought you closer now create tension. And it is not always because something has gone wrong. Sometimes it is because something has shifted within you. When your priorities change, your environment begins to respond. When your values deepen, your connections are tested. When your direction becomes clear, it reveals who is aligned with that direction and who is not. And that revelation can feel painful, especially when it involves people you care about. You may find yourself trying to explain your choices, hoping that if you say it the right way, they will understand. You may try to hold onto the connection while still moving forward, trying to balance obedience with acceptance. But there are moments when that balance cannot be maintained. Moments when moving forward requires you to accept that not everyone will come with you. And that is where isolation begins to take shape, not as a punishment, but as a byproduct of alignment. Isolation does not always mean being physically alone. You can be surrounded by people and still feel it. It is the sense that you are carrying something others do not fully see. It is the awareness that your decisions are being guided by something deeper than what can be easily explained. It is the realization that your path is no longer defined by what is common, but by what is true. In those moments, it is easy to question yourself, to wonder if you're being too extreme, too different, too disconnected, to consider going back to what felt easier, what felt accepted, what required less explanation. Because acceptance is a powerful pull, and isolation can feel heavy when it lingers. But obedience was never meant to be validated by comfort. It was never meant to be confirmed by the approval of others. It is anchored in something deeper, something that does not shift based on opinion or circumstance. And this is where your foundation is tested. Not in the presence of support, but in its absence. Not when everything feels aligned, but when everything feels uncertain. Because true obedience is not proven when it is easy. It is revealed when it is difficult. There will be days when the silence feels louder than the noise ever did. Days when you wish for clarity, for reassurance, for some sign that you are not walking this path alone. Days when the weight of being misunderstood presses against your confidence. And in those moments, you are faced with a choice. Will you continue forward, even when it feels lonely, or will you step back into what is familiar just to feel connected again? Because going back is always an option. You can always return to what feels comfortable. You can always adjust your choices to fit the expectations around you. You can always choose acceptance over alignment. But every step back comes with a cost. Not just in direction, but in identity. When you compromise what you know is right to maintain connection, you begin to lose clarity within yourself. You begin to question your convictions. You begin to dilute the very thing that was guiding you forward. And over time, that compromise creates a distance within you that is far greater than any external isolation. So the question is not whether isolation will come. The question is how you will respond when it does. Will you allow it to weaken your resolve, or will you allow it to strengthen your focus? Because there is something powerful that can be formed in isolation if you are willing to embrace it. Without the constant input of others, your sensitivity increases. Your awareness deepens. Your connection to what is guiding you becomes clearer. You begin to recognize that you're not truly alone, even when it feels that way. Isolation creates space. Space to reflect, to grow, to listen more closely. Space to develop a level of discipline that is not dependent on external accountability. Space to build a foundation that is not shaken by the opinions of others. And in that space, something begins to shift. What once felt like loneliness starts to feel like clarity. What once felt like loss begins to reveal purpose. What once felt like distance becomes a place of development. But this shift does not happen automatically. It requires a decision. A decision to see isolation not as abandonment, but as preparation. A decision to trust that there is meaning in the distance, even if you cannot fully understand it. A decision to remain committed, even when the emotional weight feels heavy. There will still be moments of struggle, moments when you miss what used to be, moments when the path feels long and uncertain, moments when the absence of familiar support makes everything feel more difficult. But those moments do not define the journey. They are part of it. Because obedience is not about avoiding difficulty. It is about staying aligned through it. And alignment sometimes requires solitude. Not forever, but for a season. A season where your focus is sharpened, your identity is strengthened, your direction is solidified. A season where you learn to stand without leaning on what once held you up. A season where your confidence is built from within, rather than from external affirmation. And as you continue to walk through that season, something becomes clear. The same isolation that once felt like a burden begins to reveal itself as a gift. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Not because you wanted it, but because it prepared you. Because there are levels of purpose that cannot be reached while holding onto everything that once surrounded you. There are depths of understanding that cannot be accessed without stepping away from constant noise. There are strengths that cannot be developed without facing moments where you must rely on something deeper than what is visible. And even though it may not feel like it in the moment, you are not walking this path alone. There is guidance in the silence, presence in the stillness, direction even when clarity feels distant. But recognizing that requires you to look beyond what you feel and trust what you know. To trust that obedience is not leading you into emptiness, but into alignment. To trust that isolation is not removing what you need, but refining what you carry. To trust that even when the path feels solitary, it is still purposeful. Because the journey you are on was never meant to be defined by how many people walk beside you, but by how faithfully you walk the path that has been placed before you, even when it requires you to continue forward without the comfort of constant companionship.